Achilles was one of the greatest warriors of Greek mythology, and his tragic death played a vital role in his famous story. Almost immortal, his one weak spot on his ankle, or as it is known, Achilles tendon, would lead to his eventual downfall during the Trojan War. Achilles' story today has become a fable reminding us, most people, no matter how strong or powerful a person might appear, they might just have a surprising weakness or vulnerability. But what are the exact circumstances of Achilles' death, and how did he actually die? Let's look into the stories behind this great mythical warrior. But before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like. The overall myth of Achilles includes his mother's attempt, the nymph Thetis, to make her son immortal. There are various versions of the story in ancient Greek literature, including her putting him in fire or water or anointing him. But the one version that is the most popular is the one with the river Styx and the Achilles Heel. This version of Thetis's attempt survives in its earliest written form in Statius's Achilles, written in the 1st century AD. Achilles was the son of a beautiful sea nymph named Thetis, and the king of the Myrmidons named Peleus. When Achilles was born, Thetis dipped Achilles into the Styx river to make him immortal. By doing so, Thetis had to hold Achilles by the heel of his left foot, leaving the heel of his foot the only portion of his body mortal. Now, with most ancient history and mythology, there are always several different versions, and the Achilles heel story also has many variations. One element with lots of variety is what Thetis had in mind when she dipped her son in whatever she dipped him in. 1. She wanted to find out if her son was mortal. 2. She wanted to make her son immortal. 3. She wanted to make her son invulnerable. In the Aegimeos, a fragmentary ancient Greek epic poem, Thetis is a nymph but the wife of a mortal, had many children, and wanted to keep only the immortal ones. So she tested each of them by putting them in a pot of boiling water. All of them died. Achilles was next on the line, but when she began to carry out the experiment, fortunately his father Peleus angrily intervened and stopped her. Other versions of the story include Thetis unintentionally taking the life of her children while attempting to make them immortal by burning off their mortal nature, or simply deliberately taking the life of her children because they are mortal and unworthy of her. No matter what the version, in the end Achilles is saved by his father. Another variant has Thetis trying to make Achilles immortal and invulnerable, and she plans to do this with a magical combination of fire and ambrosia, the food or drink of the Greek gods that would grant longevity and immortality upon whoever consumed it. This is said to be one of her skills. But Peleus interrupts her, and the interrupted magical procedure only changes his nature partially, making Achilles' skin invulnerable but himself mortal. Now let's look into Theseus's method, which also varies. 1. She puts him in a pot of boiling water. 2. She puts him in fire. 3. She puts him in a combination of fire and ambrosia. 4. She puts him in the river Styx. The earliest version of Styx dipping is not found in the Greek literature until Statius's version in the 1st century CE. Historians suggest this addition to the story was made during the Hellenistic period. Other scholars suggest the idea may have come from recent religious ideas at the time, such as baptism. Nonetheless, dipping a child in the Styx to make it immortal or invulnerable seems to still be derived from the earlier version of Thetis dipping her children in boiling water or fire in an attempt to make them immortal. To clarify, the Styx was the river of death, separating the land of the living from the dead, so didn't make the situation any less dangerous or horrific. Now let's come to how that immortality or vulnerability would be severed. There is considerable variation in the Greek literature about where Achilles' skin was perforated. As a matter of fact, many Greek and Etruscan ceramic pots show Achilles being stuck with an arrow in his thigh, or his lower leg, or his heel, or his ankle, or his foot, and in one, he simply reaches calmly down to pull the arrow out and he's fine. Some say that Achilles wasn't actually killed by a shot to the ankle but rather was distracted by the injury and thus vulnerable to a second wound. The most popular version of Achilles' story goes something like this. The Trojan War was a 10-year-long war between the Trojans and the Greeks. The Trojan War began when Helen, the queen of Sparta, was abducted by the Trojan prince named Paris. The Greeks would retaliate by battling the Trojans for years. Achilles was one of the greatest warriors and heroes for the Greeks in the Trojan War. As the Trojan War progressed, Agamemnon, who was the leader of the Achaean army, took a young Trojan woman to be his slave and would not return her. The father of the young woman was a priest to the Greek god Apollo. He begged Agamemnon for the safe return of his daughter, to which Agamemnon refused. Apollo then sent a plague and took the lives of the Greek soldiers one by one, until Chryseis, the daughter, was returned to her father. But although Agamemnon returned Chryseis to her father, he demanded that Achilles give his wife, the Trojan princess, Briseis, to him as a replacement. Achilles agreed, but decided he would no longer fight alongside Agamemnon. In fact, Achilles would no longer fight at all. He retreated to his tent with all his belongings and refused to come out. The Trojans began winning battle after battle in the Trojan War. Achilles was the Greeks' greatest warrior. Achilles had a best friend named Patroclus, who visited Achilles in his tent. He told Achilles that the Greeks could not win without his help. Achilles refused to enter back into the battle, but came up with another solution. He would let Patroclus use his armor. Not only would this protect Patroclus, but this would make the Trojans believe Achilles was back in action. Apollo was still very furious at Agamemnon for having taken Chryseis as a slave. The Trojans were retreating in fear that Achilles had now returned to the battlefield, but the furious Apollo decided he was going to help the Trojans. He would help a Trojan prince named Hector find and take the life of Patroclus. After discovering that his best friend had passed away at the hands of Hector, Achilles decided to re-enter the Trojan War in search of Hector and taking his life. Once Achilles found Hector, he stabbed him in the throat and took his life. Achilles dragged Hector's body behind his chariot to further his revenge for taking the life of his friend. And finally, Achilles decides to send Hector's body back to Troy for a proper burial. But Achilles was still very furious at losing his friend, and he wanted to further his revenge on the Trojans. Apollo, angered that Agamemnon had taken Chryseis as a slave, warned Paris that Achilles was coming. Paris was Hector's brother and was afraid of the war. When Achilles entered Troy and found Paris, Paris did the only thing he knew. He shot his arrow at Achilles. Apollo guided Paris's arrow to the most vulnerable place on Achilles, his heel, and Achilles dies immediately when the arrow pierces his heel, resulting in the popular term used to describe a weakness, an Achilles heel. Here are some variations of this story. 1. Achilles was in battle at Troy, and Paris shot him through the ankle, then stabbed him in the chest. 2. Achilles was in battle at Troy, and Paris shot him in the lower leg or thigh, and then stabbed him in the chest. 3. Achilles was in battle at Troy, and Paris shot him in the ankle with a poisoned spear. 4. Achilles was at the temple of Apollo, and Paris, guided by Apollo, shot Achilles in the ankle, which takes his life. Some historians say in the original myth, Achilles was not imperfectly vulnerable because of being dipped in the Styx, but rather because he wore armor, perhaps the invulnerable armor that Patroclus borrowed before his death, and received an injury to his lower leg or foot that was not covered by the armor. Certainly, a wound cutting or damaging what is known as the Achilles tendon would hinder any hero. In that matter, Achilles' great advantage, his swiftness and agility in the heat of battle, would have been taken away from him. Later variations of Achilles' story attempt to portray him in superhuman levels of heroic invulnerability. And while that's true to say about many mythical heroes, be it however Achilles' story might end, it is still a compelling story even today. If you liked our video, don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel for more videos like this one.